Pray for peace, people everywhere. 5 simple words, yet when we put them together, the simplicity gives way to complexity and threatens impossibility. Pray for peace, people everywhere. These lines are familiar from that 1962 Christmas carol we just sang. And as James shared, it was introduced to the world at a time when war felt imminent, at least in this country, because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so, partnering with his wife at the time, Gloria Shane, who wrote the music, the lyrics were written by Unitarian Universalist Noel Regnier. Pray for peace, people everywhere. It was as if the world was a sweet and terrible knot, and they alone could not untangle the terrible knot of war, but they offered the gift that they had, a song that made anew the nativity story, allowing it to speak to a time when the threat of war was upon the land in contemporary times. A prayer for peace. Pray for peace, people everywhere. 5 simple words that point, in fact, to a complexity, that point, in fact, to what is not so simple, that point, in fact, to what sometimes appears impossible. Peace in our time. In the song, the king tells us that the child sleeping in the night will bring us goodness and light. And here we are, gathered on this night, seeking inspiration and hope from the baby's teachings as he grew older. Yet it is not clear to me, 2,000 years after his birth or 60 years after that song was written, that we can count on peace coming from that specific source. I believe, and perhaps you do too, that it must come from us. How do we untangle the sweet and terrible knot of a world that greets us each morning we wake? How do we move from simplicity to complexity and not be stopped in our tracks there? And what about that reading, the one that named that there are prisoners crying out for release? Think here of the hostages taken on October 7th and still not free. Think here of the over 5 million Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank living as second-class citizens in occupied territories. That reading tells us he did not wait till the world was ready, till men and nations were at peace. He came when the heavens were unsteady and prisoners cried out for release. He didn't wait, and neither can we. I invite you to come with me as I explore those 5 simple words in their complexity, starting with pray. There are times when the paltry phrase, thoughts and prayers, give prayer a bad name. As someone who grew up skeptical of prayer, yet whose profession and calling requires me to take prayer seriously, I want to share with you that in times of personal crisis, when I have felt utterly helpless, I have found myself unbidden praying. And through prayer, I have found my way not around what has both been overwhelming and seemed impossible, but through. Prayer not as a solution, but as a tool, both personal and communal. And so I want to suggest to us not petitionary prayer, the kind where we ask some all-powerful entity to intervene. No, that kind of prayer relieves us of the responsibility to do what is ours to do, relieves us of that responsibility to bring not only peace about, but justice. Instead, I ask us to pray ourselves out of the delusion that we are separate, to pray ourselves out of the myth that we can get through almost anything by ourselves. I ask us to pray ourselves into a sense of connection and interconnection, cultivating that capacity to open to transformation that comes only when we know we are a part of something larger than ourselves. For peace. 2 words. Here again, something simple becomes complex, because what do we mean by peace? Is it solely the cessation of violence, the end of bombing, a ceasefire? Is it as simple as being a pacifist, lending our own personal weight to bend the moral arc of the universe so that it is against war once and for all? Or, the confusing thing, if choosing a pacifist path, do we allow bullies and fascists to run amok? It's not simple. What is happening in Israel and Palestine shows us, as if it wasn't clear before, how peace can have sides, requires different actions from players on the world stage, exacts a sophisticated engagement with history, a skillful analysis of power, and a deep dedication to collective liberation. And ultimately, at least as I understand it in this moment, requires a resilient capacity to hold paradox loosely, alongside a willingness to wade in to what seems to be a terrible knot of a world into which we are called to untangle it, even if we do not yet know how. People. Whether or not we ourselves are Christian, we gather tonight to celebrate one of the most powerful parts of the Christian story, that the source of peace and justice in an unjust world comes not from those in power, not from those of the priestly class, not from those wearing a monarch's crown, but from an unanticipated source, a lowly source. We people gather on this night because this story and its possibility speak to so many of us people, you and me and you and us. We are drawn not just to the pretty lights and the fragrant greens and the familiar carols, but to the promise and the possibility that in telling and retelling the story of a baby born to an unwed teen mother and her fiancé who stayed by her side even though he was not her father, who did not have a place to sleep, sheltered from the harsh elements, that these people have inherent worth in and of themselves and in what they can and will offer the world. When I think of the changes afoot in our groovy city that is turning grittier than any of us wish, when I hear the complaints of inconvenience by people who have roofs over their head, as I talk about those who are unhoused, when I hear blame placed on individuals instead of systems of inaccessible health care or affordable housing, I think, then yes, this story has something to say to all the people of this place. It has something to say to me. It has something to say to you. It has something to say to us. Are we listening? When I think of the overall health of our democracy, when I think of how difficult it is to kick out of our national legislative body someone who has committed serial fraud, when I think that an insurrectionist might have been barred from one state's ballot, but at least as of now is sitting on 49 other ballots, then I think of the nativity story where a tyrant was subverted by the collective actions of a few wise ones who chose to do no harm and by a few brave ones who practiced radical welcome, thereby weakening the standing order of corruption. Then yes, I think this story has something to say to all people. It has something to say to us. Everywhere. The Christian story of the birth of Jesus says that the baby born under that miraculous star was singly extraordinary. As a Unitarian Universalist, I respectfully disagree. My faith tells me and tells the world that specific child was not singly extraordinary or singly divine, because each and every child everywhere is divine, is extraordinary, because each and every child holds within them the possibility of waging peace, of fomenting justice, of being one part of the vast conspiracy to heal our common life. Every child, everywhere, among the rubble in Gaza, in decimated neighborhoods in Ukraine, in fear-saturated communities throughout Putin-led Russia, when violent division takes lives in South Sudan and Sudan, in cars on freezing nights in the Northeast Kingdom, or in tents in Battery Park. People everywhere. I think of a poem written days after that horrific attack by Hamas on October 7th. These two verses from Summons by Aurora Levins Morales will not leave my heart or my mind alone, and so I'm going to let it haunt you now, sounding like the night wind to the little lamb, sounding like a song high above the trees with a voice as big as the sea. Last night, I dreamed 10,000 grandmothers from the 1,200 corners of the earth walked out into the gap, one breath deep between bullet and flesh, between bomb and family. They told me we cannot wait for governments. There are no peacekeepers boarding planes. There are no leaders who dare say every life is precious. So it will have to be us. I hear this haunting prayer of peace and know the complicated truth, the simple truth, when it comes to peace in our time. It will have to be us. Pray for peace, people, everywhere. Amen. So be it. See to it.